Jeez, the more I hear this, the more I just want to go back and watch the latest episode of FGO. Hey, at least the crazy Lucha Libre goddess is actually intimidating. Like many a Murayama episode where he unfortunately has to do most of the legwork, we opened with a significant plot development as Tappa and his men had found a way to trace the Notarier's war pulse back to their HQ. And everyone was ecstatic at the idea of infiltrating their enemy's stronghold. I'd personally lean more towards cautiously optimistic, considering no matter what, it is going to be a risky mission. But hey, why have actual narrative stakes near the end of the series, am I right? Elena at least seemed to share my opinion, though that might have had to do more with her concerns regarding the events of last week. To pinpoint the location of the Notariers, they traveled to the planet Guten, because get it? It's an anagram for Tengu, and that's what the inhabitants of the planet were. And yeah, unsurprisingly, this was Tenjo's home planet, meaning that maybe not all of the Notariers lost their planet, and some might have just been outcast, as we'll soon see with Tenjo. In any case, the clearly bourgeois planet clearly had a specific aesthetic focus. Really would not have a nice time on this planet. But yeah, the idea of having a huge schnoz comes from the Japanese expression become a tengu, which describes the very conceited people. Though really, when you think about it, snooty people sticking their horn up in the air is a pretty universal concept. And you know, I think I just realized why they made this character a woman.
Prepare to harvest the lower horn.
Those new policies did not scare me when I have material like this. Speaking of which, nice angle there, animators. But yeah, Tenjo had also arrived back on her home planet, though clearly she wanted to switch backstories with her boss. Meanwhile, the Precure went to see the planet's top researchers, and what kind of lab is this? Old school Trek had more believable facilities than your little arcade disco hall. And yet, this was also supposed to be the place where the show's knockoff Capsule Corp tech came from. I'm just gonna assume that these blowhards legit knocked off DBZ and just move on. With some time to kill, the Precure took in the sights, though honestly, I would get on the first rocket off this stinking planet. But of course, our thick-headed Pink didn't realize when she was being looked down upon. Elena, on the other hand, was starting to pick up on something a little off about this planet of D-bags and their smiles. This was backed up by Tenjo when she found her assigned rival in the last quarter of the series with an admittedly well-written speech as she pointed out how her planet was full of scumbags who hid their condescending prejudice behind their smiles. The rest of her team soon joined to confront the villainess. Also, the Raiders pretty much dropped my gimmick all the way back in episode 14, so really this isn't all that different. They transformed, and the first half of this fight was actually pretty good, more than likely thanks to them once again bringing in a Washio-era animator, this time Akira Inagami, whom also holds the title of character designer for all of the Futari titles. Gee, it's almost as if bringing experienced vets as opposed to worn-out has-beens actually kind of pays off, don't it? During the fight, the painfully obvious truth came out that Tenjo had a normal-sized nose, or by her planet standard, an abnormally small one. On a side note, if she had no real otherworldly features other than her skin color, then really, why bother with that magical pearl disguise? Just change your clothes for once, lady. This is 80 Shredder levels of pointless disguise. Anyway, because of her small nostrils, while everyone seemed to comfort her at first, she soon realized they were concealing their true toxic selves behind their masks. In other words, Twitter in a nutshell. Seriously, I think this planet should just be eaten by Unicron at this point. Tenjo kind of agreed with me, but wanted to do it by her own hands. Thus, the dominatrix became a slave herself and turned into one of the least threatening endgame boss generals in the entire franchise. That is, unless you think the putties are actually threatening. And unfortunately, the second half of this week's fight saw a significant dip in quality. Then again, there wasn't much actually going on here other than some retraining from last week, with Madoka even cheering Elena on again. Yes, we get it, Murayama, you wanna ship these two, whatever. Anyway, Elena came to realize that while in no way vindictive like the residents of this planet, Her smile was also insincere. Okay, nice that she admitted that, but then... Yeah, just ignore the little detail that she suffered through legit body shaming, and most of your insecurities were more than likely self-imposed. Remind me again, why did they even make this character half Mexican if they were barely going to even touch on it? I'll get more into this during my closing thoughts, but really, this whole thing with the Precure comparing themselves with their villainous counterparts really hasn't been working out, other than maybe one exception. Anyway, platitudes about the importance of smiles, Elena woke her twinkle imagination, for a call chant.
Yada yada yada.
To her credit, Tenjo did at least leave on a strong line, asking her rival to try and make her smile. She returned to their HQ sans her mask, thankfully, and Darkness announced that they were entering into... Phase 2! Though not as cool as that. Tappa was going to continue to work on deciphering the location of the Notarators. Thus, the Precure returned to Earth, with Elena returning home to help her mother with the cooking. Though, while she had been chopping onions, they weren't the source of her tears, as she finally decided to confide in her mother on what a truly sincere smile is. Yep, I definitely want to see Chris Yukine become a Precure next season. She's already more fleshed out than her daughter at this point. Thus, the episode ended with Elena declaring that she would indeed be following in her mother's footsteps as a translator to bring smiles to everyone, even though I'm pretty sure that's not their main job, and the family sat down to their stereotypical taco dinner. To this episode's credit, it did get half of the conflict right. Problem is, like much of this final stretch of episodes, it was more on the antagonist side of things. That said, I will give credit where it's due to Tenjo for at least having some decent build-up to this episode and her backstory. Throughout these past few episodes with her, they made it clear that she detested smiles, though they wisely didn't give us the exact reason why. We could kinda pick up on it having to do with her appearance, but they didn't come out and say how it connected to smiles. Thus, when we got this episode, it all started to click into place. So, while not the deepest Precure antagonist by any means, at least they finally did something with Tenjo, even though they probably should have hinted at this a little more throughout the series. Maybe actually have her enter into a rival with Elena much sooner. Speaking of which, yeah, let's get to that scene and that speech. While I can totally understand a Precure sympathizing with their enemy, it kinda diminishes their platform when they state things like they're the same as their enemies when clearly they're not. Tenjo legitimately had to put up with her planet silently denouncing her, which is probably one of the worst kinds of discrimination. Meanwhile, Elena dealt with some self-imposed social anxiety, and while that is a legit issue in of itself, it's nowhere near the same as what Tenjo went through. Thus, if they really wanted to hammer this home, then maybe they should have actually had her go through some form of discrimination. I'm not saying they should have been heavy-handed with it, but just maybe something like Lala, the cure who still, and more than likely, will hold the title of Best Twinkle Imagination Awakening. She overcame not just the discrimination of her home planet, but also a brief experience on her new home. Then again, I think she had the advantage of having many of her episodes being written by the head writer himself, who was willing to take the risks. And I think that's the main issue I have with this series and its writing team. They just didn't take enough risk and give our heroines enough obstacles to overcome. Many of their victories came easy to them, and thus when they say they sympathize with their enemy, it kind of comes off almost as patronizing as these guys. As I keep saying, this show needed better planning because with only a few episodes left, I can only predict things will continue to fall apart on them. If you haven't seen it yet, I just uploaded part 1 of my Symphogear GX review. Yeah, this year I decided to split it up into 2 parts. Honestly, it makes editing a lot easier as I can more easily spot the little errors I tend to make. Plus, I'm able to give you guys more videos on a regular basis, which is going to be my New Year's resolution, and no amount of poorly thought out policies is going to stop me. Look forward to part 2, maybe around Christmas time. I'm not making any promises as that tends to jinx things. But regardless, look forward to it, and until then, no, farewell for now, my friends, and I need to cheer myself up with the holidays.